Thank you for joining us here on this episode on windsurftuts.com. This is the fourth in a four-part series on Microsoft Windows failover clustering. If you followed along with us in the previous videos, this failover cluster manager MMC should look familiar to you. We've gone through, we've covered a little bit of theory about clustering. We set up our hosts, the nodes in the cluster. In the last video, we actually did the cluster install, and now in this video, we are going to install a very common application that runs on failover clusters, and that will be the enterprise version of Microsoft SQL. Many companies use Microsoft clustering specifically for this purpose. So I want to do just a couple of things to get us ready to install our SQL cluster on here. And one of the things that we'll want to do is we will want to disable NetBIOS on our private network adapters here. This is not necessarily a cluster requirement, but it is a recommended thing to be done for MS SQL. And I just want to give you a heads up. I went through and I read a lot of the white papers and the guidance from Microsoft via Technet, and I tried to take that information and consolidate it down into one document so it could be a little bit more easily digested and give you those links back to the Technet articles. So that will be available, that paper, for download on our website, so you could use that as a handy reference if you kind of need to skim through and get just the higher points of installing a SQL instance on a cluster. So for our private networks, we will be disabling NetBIOS on the Heartbeat and iSCSI. So we're going to go into IPv4. We're going to do advanced, and in the Win tab here, and we are going to disable NetBIOS over TCP/IP. So it was under advanced and Wins for those of us who haven't used Wins in a long time, so we're going to disable that there. And we are also going to disable it in our iSCSI network as well. So we're just going to disable it here as well. And close. Repeat this process over on node 2. Again, that's under IPv4. Properties, advanced, and Wins. And then again, finally on our other iSCSI adapter. So that is, again, not necessarily a clustering issue, but this is a SQL issue. Want to make sure that we try to have things optimized as much as possible. Another thing that we are going to have to do before we get our SQL install underway is we're going to have to install the .NET framework. And so for both of these servers, we can install the .NET framework from Features, and you can either right click and do Add Feature, or you can select this menu option over here. And it'll bring up our Add Features. And you can see right here at the top the .NET framework 3.5.1. Now, depending on if you are going to use named pipes for SQL communication, there's this non-HTTP activation option here under the WCF activation that your database person or your application developer would probably know. So you need to talk to them if you need to install or configure this option. We will select it for this particular installation. You know what? We don't need HTTP activation, and we don't want to install IIS. Okay, so there we go. So basically we'll have that because we know we're not going to be needing any HTTP type activation for this cluster scenario, so we can leave that out. We're going to select next. We'll do the same thing over here. We're going to add these features again, the .NET framework, and non-HTTP activation, add the required features, and we'll let this start off here. Okay, Again, if you're dealing with name pipes or not, talk to your application developers or talk to your DBA specifically and see if that's something that you need. It might be something that you need to do a little bit of reading about in your environment. Again, getting back to some user comments, again, thank you for those. Sometimes people will ask, how do I know if I should apply this in my environment? And that's a really difficult question to answer in a generic and broad sense because everybody's environment is a little bit different. And so what you need to do is really look at the applications. What are the requirements of the applications in your environment? And especially if you're dealing with programmers, they should really know how they're developing the software. What are the requirements for the software? Things like that. So again, if you're using this environment, NamePipe specifically, sometimes applications will use it, sometimes they won't. That might be a little option that you will either need or not need. So let this finish up. Okay, so as you can see, these have just finished up here. We can just skip to the end. We see again Windows Updates is not automatically enabled. That's okay, but we do see our installation was successful. So we're going to close this out. Okay, and we will minimize these windows here. And now we are actually going to go through and do the SQL Server installation. And I've just downloaded these packages. I have them on the desktop. Maybe yours will be on a CD. And if you are familiar with installing cluster-aware applications from previous versions, you used to just have to install SQL on one node and it would propagate. It's a little bit different in this install. So again, some changes in the newer versions of Microsoft operating systems. So just go through and we'll run these installations. Yes, and you will have to be logged on as an administrator account. Let this start up. While we're waiting for this, I just do want to say thank you again for visiting. If you do like the videos, take a look at the people who sponsor us with their small ads at the bottom of your screen. It is much appreciated. It helps keep the videos running. Alright, so we're going to run through the initialization options, and if this takes more than a few moments, I'll just pass over it so we can get into the install. Okay, so this is the screen that we are presented with when we first launch our installation. And what you'll see is very similar to how we had our cluster validation wizard and when we were getting ready to install our cluster. We have something very similar right here, system configuration checker. So what we want to do is we do want to run this, and this will check the conditions of our cluster and our setup to make sure that we are successful and that we are well prepared to install SQL on this host. So we're going to run that. And again, if this takes too long to fire up, we'll just skip to the end so we can see the results. But all I did was just double click this system configuration checker here. Okay, so we see this roll check has started and is progressing. And let's view the details. As you can see, this looks somewhat similar to what we were going through in our cluster validation wizard. Microsoft does a good job to try to make their software fairly similar, so the learning curve from one application can be applied in another. And as you can see, we've done a good job in preparing our cluster and our hosts. We have passed all of the conditions that we will need. Select OK. Let this finish up. Okay, and so now what we are going to do is we are actually going to install our cluster. So we'll just go down to installation here, and if you see, we have right here two options that we're going to be using: new SQL Server failover cluster installation or add a node to a SQL Server failover cluster. Again, if you are familiar with previous versions of SQL and installing them on a cluster, this might be a little bit different than what you're used to seeing, but that's okay. We're going to walk through this. So we're going to install a new SQL Server failover cluster installation. Okay, so you see here that we are presented with the first screen in our installation process. It's going to show the details. You can see that we have all of our conditions have passed, and we are going to go on to the next step. It's going to go out, take a look for any product updates, things of that nature. But we should be good. I don't think we should have to download anything. We should be at the latest version. I would always recommend that if you are doing a SQL install, you download the latest version of the software, so all of the hotfixes and everything that is updated or is as up to date as possible. So we're going to go through, we're going to install the setup support files. As you can see, we see this dialog box quite a bit. Please wait while SQL Server 2008 R2 setup processes the current operation. The install is not very difficult per se, it just is fairly time consuming. So make sure that if you are going to be running through this process, you do have some time on your hands. This would probably be a full day, if not a multi-day job to set up your cluster, get it all planned out, documented properly, and things of that nature. To show the details of what's going on here, we will probably get 2 warnings. Yep, the distributed transaction coordinator is not clustered, and for some reason we did go through and we did look at the network binding order, and we do have our domain as our first network binding, but for some reason the SQL Server continues to throw an error on that. I noticed it as I was going through and preparing for this lab, so we should be okay. There's our, alright, accept the licensing terms. Okay, so now again, this you might actually have to ask your database group or your application developer what you would need. In our case, I'm going to install our instance features, our management tools. I do like the documentation. It doesn't take up that much space, so, and we won't be having multiple databases, so I think this is all. We might be using Microsoft Sync for Exchange later, so I'm going to install that. So next. I actually end up using a lot of this stuff that I install in my home lab. So some of the things that I'm using you may not use. Again, you would definitely want to check with your applications as far as what your required resources are. Many times people will ask, how do I know what should be on my network versus what you install? And in all honesty, that is something that's driven by the business needs of your organization. So what we are going to do is we are going to give this server a name WST for WinServe Toots SQL01. That is what we will call it. You can give the instance a different name. We'll stick with the default here. As you can see, we don't have any other instances running on this computer. Okay, so now we have a listing. Total, it will take about 4.5 gigs to install this, so it's not too bad. We're going to run through next. And as you can see, we don't have any available cluster resource groups that we can place this on, and that's okay because we're going to create our own resource group. But what I want to do is I want to name it so we don't have any spaces, and we can call this actually we'll just call it WSTCLU01, just like the server name. We'll do next. So we're going to create a new resource group for that. Now, as you can see here, we have our quorum disk that is used for the cluster itself. We actually want to use this SQL data disk to install the SQL Server on. So we're going to select next. And I actually went through and I renamed my 2 disks, quorum and SQL data, just so they were a little bit easier to follow. Next. Now it's going to ask us about the IP configuration. We do not want to use DHCP for this. So what we're going to do is we are going to enter in 10.10. Let's do 60. And that will be the address that we are going to use for this network resource. Finish. So local security groups installed as part of your failover cluster. And actually this is also a change. It is recommended that you use the service SIDs, so we are going to leave that the default. If you do want to have a specific user within your domain manage that, that's okay, but this is the recommended to use service IDs. And this is going to give the account that the host will run under. Let's go over to our domain controller. And we will log in here. We will create an account, new user, okay, and we are going to set this so it does not expire, cannot change password. We will give it a nice fairly complex password here. In all honesty, if you were to have this in your type of environment, I would recommend a password of probably about 30 to 40 characters. So that's just a heads up there. Okay, we're going to finish that. And I actually like to put my service users in this organizational unit that I have created just for my service unit. Let's go back to our SQL server here and SQL runner. And let's use the same account. Okay. So we're good there. Oh, let me just make sure that I entered the password correctly. SQL. Let's just make sure this is the right. Check name. Okay, so we're good there. Let me make sure I Okay, must have fat fingered that password. So now what we want to make sure, this is really important, okay? We want to make sure the authentication mode in the administrators for the database engine. So you can actually set up a database and not allow anybody to log into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my name right now. Also, you can take a look at different data directories. Here you can see we're going to use the F drive, different file stream options. We don't need to worry about that right now, but this is very, very important. If you are using Windows mode authentication and you don't add a user here, you can lock yourself out of your SQL database. So this is very key. Make sure that you add at least one user here, and probably it will be like an enterprise administrator and then maybe your senior database administrator, something of that nature. So do make sure that you put a name here. This is very important. Go next. To add current user again. So let me just make sure these data directories are right. This should also be on the F drive. Okay, that is correct. Account provisioning, we're good there. Okay. Run through the default here. and we don't really want to send error reports right now. Okay, so now let's go through, and alright, everything looks good, so we're okay to do the install. And now we are ready to install, and it is going to go through, give us a summary of everything that we're going to be installing. Select install, and now this is going to start progressing through. It might take a little while, so if this starts to draw out, I will skip to the completed installation. You don't need to watch this thing install. Okay, so as you can see here, this is just about finishing up. Everything installed successfully, and on my system this took right about 20 minutes, almost on the dime, to install. So when you kick this off, you probably want to go through and go grab yourself a cup of coffee, maybe do this as you're taking your lunch break, let it run, come back and check your results. As you can see, everything installed. The installation is complete, so we're going to close this out here. Okay, so now what we are going to try to do, this video is getting to be a little bit long, but I'd like to get it finished all today. We're going to go over to our other node, and we're going to install the node to the cluster. So let's go through here. Let's look at our cluster manager. Let's see what we have in services and applications. We do have a service and application group now. Okay. So we do have, look, we have this SQL data disk, we have the name, okay, we have the IP address associated with it. Take a look at the properties. Just something, a cool side note, you can actually set for your application and resource groups or services and application groups the preferred cluster node that you would like this to run on. So let's say cluster node 1 is more powerful than cluster node 2, maybe it has more memory. You can actually select this as a preferred owner. We're going to leave that blank for now. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to cluster node number 2. We are going to run this setup here, kick this off. And if you remember, we had the two options when we started our other installation: add a node to a SQL server failover cluster and a new server failover cluster. We just ran the new server failover cluster installation. We are now going to be doing the add node to SQL server failover cluster, and this should be significantly faster. So, okay. And let's go to installation, and we are going to do, again, add node to an SQL server failover cluster. Okay, and we can see here this is kicking off. Let's take a look at these details. Right, so we've passed on all of our operations. It's gonna Okay, so the setup support file install, we'll run through this. A lot of this you will probably recognize is very similar to when we created our initial cluster. Okay, and as we can see here, it's going to go through, and we will probably get those same two warnings that the Microsoft Distributed Transaction Coordinator is not clustered, and our NIC binding order here. So we did get those same two warnings, but we should be okay. I just want to let you know you may have to, if your firewall is not configured, your Windows firewall, to let in SQL traffic, you might have to go through and do that after this video. You just test it out, but if you find that you can't connect to your SQL cluster through any of the management tools, you might have to go through and do that. So we'll finish waiting for this to run through here. Okay, so that ran through successfully. Next, and just our key there. And we're going to accept the licensing terms. And this is our server instance. This is the name of the node that we are going to add. We can see this is our cluster name. We are going to add our node 2 and go through next. Here we have our service accounts, and we can use that SQL runner. We'll fill in our passwords. The server agent. Okay, so that should be good. Alright, we don't want to send error reports. And let's see what we get for this. Okay, it looks like everything passed here. And this is going to be our summary. And now this is going to go through and actually do the install. This might take a little while, so what I'm going to do is I will hold the video until right at this finishes. This could take up to about 20 minutes to run through this whole install, so don't want to make you sit through that. So as you can see here, our cluster, our second node finished installing, so we'll close this out. And let's go back to our cluster manager and see what we have here. Let's take a look at our cluster manager. And we do have our cluster here. The current owner is cluster node 01. So let's just make sure we see that same view from over here. Okay, so what we're going to do to test this out is let's try to initiate a failover, and we're going to move this over to cluster node 2. And we should see all these processes go offline for a moment. So pending all offline. Okay. So the data, the disk has come back online. The IP address has already come online. And we can see up here that now where the owner was cluster node 1, it is now cluster node 2. So we did initiate a successful failover from one node to the other. And good, everything should be back online now. This is our server agent. Okay, great. So now let's go see if we can actually connect in to this database server. We have this here, and remember, you might need to have a firewall rule change for your Windows firewall, and this is the cluster name, the WST SQL01. So let's try to connect there where we're using Windows authentication. Okay, and we got right in. Excellent. So our endeavors have been a success. We have our cluster set up. We have MS SQL set up on our cluster. We're able to get into our database server. Right from here on out, we would be able to create new databases, things of that nature. So really, this was quite an intense tutorial. Some pretty advanced functionality here. Hopefully you all have learned a lot. I know that it's been a great learning experience for me making the video. I just want to let you know I am actually upgrading the WinServe Toots lab. I'm moving from a Citrix Zen server installation to a VMware ESXi 5 environment and adding another node, so I should be able to have a little bit more powerful setup. I want to actually do an Exchange server tutorial. I've been talking about that, and the current setup that I have might not be the most optimal for that, so I might not have a video out for a week or so. I'm going to try to get the whole lab rebuilt. Fun. But please do stop by. Thank you so much for following along in this tutorial series. It was a big undertaking, and like I said, hopefully you got a lot out of it. Do make sure you follow us on Twitter at WinServeToots, and do check out the website winservetoots.com, and let us know what you think. Please give us any feedback that you may have, and again, thank you for watching here on winservetoots.com.